to start by introducing myself. So I am Julie Reed, and I'm the Community Education Supervisor for Fanshawe with the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. I'm also a member of the London Bird Team, and this team is working towards getting London certified as a bird-friendly city by Nature Canada. A really exciting project, and we hope you can support us and share the news. So this event is actually part of the London Birds team's, World Migratory Bird Day celebration. So if you're able to, we are having 2 more virtual experiences, both on Saturday, May 8th, if you'd like to join us for those. So we will be posting some family videos on a YouTube playlist, and they will include different activities and nature challenges, lots of information on migratory birds, and also a bird trivia challenge. So we encourage you to join in on that fun. That will be posted on the morning of May 8th. And then on Saturday evening at 7 p.m., we have another webinar, another talk with Dr. Christopher Guglielmo, and he will be talking on using physiology and automated telemetry to understand stopover and movement of migratory birds and bats in human-dominated landscapes. So sure to be a very interesting talk as well. In a few moments, I'll just post the link to our website in the chat if you're interested in learning more about either of those events. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank Nature London for funding this event. Thank you so much, Nature London. Also, the other bird team partners include the City of London, Friends of Stony Creek, London Environmental Network, Salt Haven, Upper Thames River Conservation Authority, and Western University Advanced Facility for Avian Research. So thank you so much to all of these community partners. And lastly, I wanted to let you know we will be recording this webinar tonight. So moving on to our agenda, obviously I just did the welcome, so welcome and thank you. I will be doing a land acknowledgement, and then the main feature, what you're all here for, we'll be having Andrea do her talk. After that, we'll have a question and answer period. So you will have your opportunities to ask Andrea your questions, and then I will do a quick wrap up. So we acknowledge the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehouk, and Attawandaron peoples. We are committed to building respectful, reciprocal relationships with local Indigenous communities, which includes the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, the Oneida Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation. We wish to honor the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum, an agreement that we all have a responsibility to protect and care for the land we live on. Today, we're lucky enough to have Andrea Boyle here with us to share her knowledge and experience. She's going to share ways we can attract migratory birds to the forest city. After Andrea speaks, we will have a chance, or you'll have a chance to ask your questions. So at any time tonight, you can type your questions in the Zoom Q&A feature. You'll find that feature on the bottom of your screen. It looks like 2 speech bubbles and says Q&A. So you can click on that and you can enter a question for Andrea in there, or you can also enter it in the chat as you'd like. And I will ask your questions after Andrea finishes her talk. So Dr. Andrea Boyle is a professor at Fanshawe College and also teaches at Western University. During her PhD and Master of Science, she studied the effects of changing weather patterns on birds' physiology and behavior. Andrea is the current environmentalist in residence at the London Public Library, working to engage Londoners in environmentally significant issues around the city. She hopes to bring that same level of community engagement to the London Bird Team, in addition to research endeavors for future development of making London a certified bird-friendly city. So thanks again, Andrea, and I'll pass it on over to you now.
Great. Thanks, Julie. And thanks everybody for joining us this evening. I see a few of you that were with me at the Environmentalist in Residence webinar. So welcome back to those of you as well. So today our talk is really all about attracting birds to the forest city. This is about World Migratory Bird Day. We want to know how we can attract birds to our yards and also how do we keep our yards safe for them? So first of all, let's start off with this really vague question. Why do birds matter? Birds obviously matter to all of us because you've joined us here for Migratory Bird Day. Obviously, they're really important to me. I spent about 6 or 7 years studying birds. But what role do birds really play in our ecosystem? Let's start by answering this question before we get into anything else. And really, why should birds matter to you? Birds have many really important roles in addition to having a lot of cultural impacts. Can you ask yourself this question here? Can you imagine stepping outside and not hearing birds chirping in the morning, or seeing birds flying up in the skies, or even us deeming someone lucky if they had a bird poop on them? I have a personal story here. I had an outdoor wedding last year. As I was walking down the aisle, the train on my dress, I bird pooped on it during the ceremony. So I consider myself to be pretty lucky. So we have these really big cultural impacts when we think about birds. But birds also perform many vital ecosystem functions that even help us thrive. So for example, if we didn't have birds, we wouldn't have a lot of our crops being pollinated. We wouldn't have seeds being dispersed and spreading different native species around. We wouldn't have this control on a lot of our insect population when we think about those aerial insectivores that are help keeping those populations in control. A lot of birds also play a role in decomposing. So if we think about those turkey vultures, those are migratory birds that have made their way back to London now, and also just this general healthy ecosystem functioning. Ultimately, when we think about birds, their fate is really our fate. So there's so many reasons why we want to protect them. And I know all of you here must as well. So let's start talking about spring migration 2021. We're currently near, if not in, our peak migration time for birds. Within London, our spring migratory season runs from about March to May, the end of May. Have you noticed lately that the skies are a little bit noisier, or maybe there's a few more birds at your bird feeders? If you go out on walks in ESAs within the city, have you seen more birds in the trees or in the shrubs? Maybe it's just a little bit noisier. We have billions of birds that migrate each year. That's a lot of birds. And Middlesex County, London included, is one of those hot spots for migratory bird activity. This image that you're looking at on your slide here, this is showing us the number of birds moving as this radar image. So we can actually track bird movement on radar, just like we can track precipitation. So we can see in this figure with those warmer colors there, that represents a higher frequency of bird migration this night on the eastern side of the United States compared to the west. I grabbed this image off of this Birdcast website a few days ago, so you'll see that this is marked on May 2nd at 11:25 p.m. And at that time, there were over 506 million birds in flight. So Birdcast has some really cool imaging to keep track of how busy our migratory skies are. I encourage you to check that out. But our main question that we're posing here is how can you actually attract more of these birds to your yard during this migratory season, and also during non-migratory seasons as well? Also, another important thing is how do we actually keep those birds safe? So these are the main questions that I'll be answering throughout this talk. So first of all, let's start off with how to attract birds to your yard. First of all, they need a happy habitat in order to actually stick around. So if you're providing them with a habitat that they naturally encounter, then that's one good reason for them to stick around in their yards. One thing that we need to remember is that we as humans are really encroaching the homes of a lot of wildlife that used to dwell in these Carolinian forests that were here before all of these city skylines were erected. This image on your slide here is showing us a Carolinian forest, which is what this London region looked like not all that long ago. So really by creating and restoring those habitat requirements of birds in your backyard, this is no doubt going to attract more birds to visit you. So we'll look at each of these food, water, shelter, and nesting sites in a little bit more detail. So during the warmer months, birds rely on native plants and insects for food. Here we're focusing on providing more than just bird seed in your backyard if you want to attract those birds. So having native plants, which also attract native insects, is a really vital way of providing food for birds. Plants are considered native if they have originated in or they're growing naturally in a certain area. They're native because they've adapted to the soils that are naturally within this region. They have adapted, they grow best within our regional climates. And also wildlife find natural food sources within these native plants. Also, a good thing about native plants is that they're going to survive our changes in climate. So if we're experiencing floods and droughts and frosts, a lot of these native plants are very hardy, and they can be grown to basically withstand those conditions. Having non-native species in your garden can be somewhat helpful, but it's really those native plants that provide this haven for birds. Our native plants are naturally producing things like seeds and berries and nuts and nectar, things that local wildlife really is going to enjoy. So birds really prefer these plants. They'll keep coming back. These plants also harbor insects that birds like to eat if they're not actually directly eating those plants. My backyard, I've got over 30 species of native plants. I'm hoping I keep expanding that list, but sort of going hand in hand with that, my backyard bird list also keeps getting bigger and bigger as the year is going on. One note about birdseed here, this can be provided all year long, but it's mostly beneficial in the winter when those plants and insects are scarce. And again, if you've got those native plants, those insects and berries should be plentiful. Additionally, leaving natural patches on your lawn, so things like fallen leaves and unmowed areas, that's going to encourage foraging. So a lot of birds forage on the ground naturally. They're looking for small insects. So by not picking up your leaf litter, you're providing habitat for a lot of those insects, as well as providing food for those birds. So we really encourage you to just leave sort of the mess from winter until that first frost, and we'll see that on the next slide. The final point here in green, this is just a really great website which informs you which native plants provide which services for birds and other insects. You can find this probably through a quick Google search, but I think that Julie's going to share that website for us here. This slide here is just reminding you to leave those leaves alone. This is showing us London is in this zone 6A, which basically tells us that our last frost usually occurs between May 1st and May 10th. So if you're leaving all of your leaf litter on the ground until then, that is basically just ensuring that those insects, which are food for birds, are not disturbed and you're not killing off any of those populations. Another feature to attract birds to your yard is providing them with fresh water. So in those warmer months, birds seek out water to drink. Water features can also attract other insects, which, as we know, are food for a lot of birds. Birds also like to keep clean. As you can see in this image here, this black-capped chickadee is giving himself a bath, or herself. So consider installing a pond or a creek or a bird bath, but make sure you're following these important features to keep those birds safe as well. You want to make sure that that water feature isn't too deep, that it has some type of a graded perimeter to prevent drowning. So not all wildlife is able to jump out of a very deep pond. So just try to keep that in mind if you're introducing this water feature. You should also have water circulating to prevent mosquitoes from breeding in there. Also, it's really, you can get different bacteria and diseases within that water if you're not continuously changing that out as well. So this point here, basically just providing natural shelter to keep birds safer. So if you're introducing those native trees and shrubs, this is providing habitat and shelter for those birds. One thing that's protecting it birds from is natural predators. So that's sort of a hiding space for birds to go. But also, and this is what I spent my master's and my PhD studying, was what birds basically do during storms. A lot of the times they need to sort of hunker down and avoid that storm if fleeing that area isn't an obvious option. So this is an important one to think about. If it's really stormy and windy outside, they need somewhere to go. If you've got a lot of grassy or shrub regions in your yard, they're likely to hunker down there. So some birds like black-capped chickadees and eastern bluebirds, I think it was Kathy that was mentioning these will use nest boxes in a yard. Nest boxes will also be used by other species. I think maybe Doug was mentioning a nuthatch was in a nest box in his backyard. But anyways, regardless of what species you get, it's pretty cool to have a bird nesting in your backyard. These are just some of the best practices in order to set up that nest box in your backyard and ensure that birds are kept safe and that they're actually able to use that box. So first of all, you want to keep mammals, things like squirrels and raccoons, out. It's ideal to mount any sort of nest box on a post that's away from trees or structures. You know, all of those squirrel-proof feeders aren't actually very squirrel-proof, so keep that in mind. Adding a baffle, just something around that post to keep mammals from climbing up, is a good idea. Also, what you can see in this image down here is lining that actual entrance, that circle of the next nest box, with metal to make sure that squirrels aren't widening that hole and actually getting in. So keeping birds safe is really important to all of us if we're tuning in today. Unfortunately, there's a lot of human-caused threats that birds are facing. Here we're looking at a graph showing what's actually killing our North American birds. So these anthropogenic threats or human threats. Sort of the worst issue, which is really, really alarming here, by far, is free roaming cats. So cats are really an invasive predator of birds, and they should be kept indoors. Bird deaths in the United States and Canada is in the billions each year, which is so alarming. We'll talk a little bit more about cats on the next slide. The next leading direct source of bird mortality here is collisions with windows, which kill several 100 million birds every year in the United States and Canada. Both of these things are entirely preventable. Another thing to point out briefly here is we can also see much lower fatality levels with things like power lines and wind turbines. So commonly that's brought up as being controversial for harming birds, but really it's cats and windows that are our major issues here. So as you saw in that previous slide, cats represent the leading direct human-caused source of bird deaths within North America. Cats are not a natural predator of birds. The only reason cats exist around the world is because of domestication from people. We really need to enforce the fact that cats should not be allowed to roam unsupervised outside. We really need to treat cats like dogs by keeping them contained or on a leash. It's also very unsafe for the cat itself to be let outside. So that's another thing to keep in mind. A lot of the times people say, well, my cat doesn't kill birds. It's not like that. But I promise you that your cat is still killing birds. Additionally, London's animal control bylaw actually prohibits pets from roaming outside, and this also does include cats. Now, if you are a cat owner and you have a cat that really enjoys being outside, consider trying to train your cat to wear a harness or some pretty elaborate options here of a catio. These are obviously very well made, but they certainly don't have to be this elaborate, just so that your cat can still get outside, but we're keeping wildlife safe. So it's wonderful when we're able to see birds in our own backyards, but a common problem with attracting many birds to our homes are window collisions. So again, our number 2 human-caused threat to birds was window collisions. And in fact, the average structure with glass windows is killing about 2 to 10 birds per year. And we have at least 23 bird species at risk that collide with buildings within Canada. Another important note here is that most bird window collisions happen at homes, especially homes during or near bird habitats. So if you're quickly looking at this figure at the bottom here, this proportion of bird window collisions in Canada, that red bar, about 90%, that represents collisions in homes. We've got a smaller percentage of low-rise buildings in yellow, and in blue, just that very small amount of birds that are killed by high-rise buildings. So really the issue is mainly with homes. This is a photo from Brendan Samuels. He is our bird-friendly team leader. He's doing research on bird collisions at Western University. This image here, this is showing the number of birds killed by windows on just 40 buildings in London over a 7-month time frame. So that's a lot of birds. We don't know the official number within London, but probably many thousands per year. So let's ask this question, why are birds actually hitting windows? Are they not very smart? Can they not see very well? The answer to both of these questions is no, they are very smart and they do have very great vision, but birds don't actually understand what glass is, right? So if we're looking at these images here, we know as humans that this is glass, but birds just interpret this as flying through their own habitat. They're seeing that reflection. So they likely see this habitat, they think they're going to land in one of those trees that they see in the glass, but in fact, they're actually just colliding. So we have a few ways that we'll talk today about actually providing window treatments to your actual glass. We want to make sure that you're always treating your windows by applying visual markers on the exterior side of the glass. We'll talk about this in more detail too. And keep in mind that those single marker cutouts are not effective. The next slide will show us what we mean here. So most of those bird safety products on the market are designed based on human vision and human aesthetic tastes rather than how birds actually see. So many of these are not actually effective. So these window silhouette decals that are often sold, that's not an effective way of inhibiting those bird strikes. So when we're looking at this figure here, birds are, we have to remember they're adapted to fly through very small spaces when they're flying through trees or thick brush, so they can easily fly around and through objects. We need to apply those decals. This is an effective application of a window if you're using these types of bird decals. So the bird doesn't see this single bird and think that's a solid surface. It needs to see enough breaking up of that window to tell that it's a solid surface. So here's what actually does work for those window decals. They need to, as I mentioned, be on the outside of the glass. It needs to cover that entire surface. It needs to also be within this 2-inch by 2-inch coverage. And you also should have this high visual contrast against your background. So choosing colors like white is better for sticker placement. These are just a couple of examples of what a good example of a window treatment looks like. This tape here, this is feather-friendly DIY tape. It's sold in London at Featherfields, which is a very easy way to apply that bird decal. This is another option, this oil-based paint. Here's what it looks like. you can just draw any design on your window, keeping in mind that 2-inch by 2-inch flat platform. Moving on here to feeder maintenance and placement. So making sure that your feeders are cleaned properly is an important factor here. So you can typically walk right up to a bird that is suffering from some type of a disease outbreak, like this poor guy here. So make sure that you're washing your bird feeders often. This bird specifically has been infected with salmonella, and that can be spread through bird feeders. You also want to make sure that you're only serving fresh, dry seed. So if it's gotten wet, you want to try to change that out. You don't want to introduce bacteria and mold. And the same is true for jelly or fresh fruit. For those Baltimore Orioles that are coming through right now, we don't want to introduce mold and bacteria. You can also consider feeding only in those winter months. Birds have enough food from things like berries and insects. It's not a bad thing to feed bird seed in the summer, but it's certainly more beneficial within the winter months. Feeder maintenance, or your placement rather, you should really place those feeders within 3 feet of your window to reduce the severity of a potential window collision. So if your feeder is very close to your window, you're not giving the bird the opportunity enough velocity really to take off of that bird feeder and hit your window. You also want to make sure that you don't sort of pose hazards by having cords hanging down that they can get entrapped with. Another note here is don't provide them with artificial nesting material. They don't need it. If you just leave out those grasses, those weeds or leaves, sticks, they will be able to perfectly make their nest. These other materials, things like hair or cotton or yarn or string, that can actually even be a little bit detrimental for these birds. So all in all, what can you do? Just a quick summary: plant those native species. That's introducing a lot of food, and that's a big reason why birds would want to visit your house. Use effective window decals. Just don't clean your windows. So making sure that those windows look dirty, they're not going to be flying in to your windows as much. Make sure your feeder placement is appropriate. And also during this migratory season, turn those lights off at night. We don't want to be distracting those birds. Finally, just share this information with friends and family. So changing that human behavior and encouraging others to do what you've learned tonight is also a great way to see some type of a positive change. I just wanted to quickly end on how to actually identify those backyard birds and highlight an app here. So technology is a really great way to identify both migratory and resident birds. This app here, this Merlin Bird ID app, this is a really great aid for identifying birds. So it allows you to either upload a photo of the bird, and it has the technology to suggest what it might be, or answer a few questions, things like what was the bird doing, what size was the bird, what were the main colors, and it should be able to prepare you a list of a few species that it might be. So if you've got a few migratory birds coming through, you're not sure what they are, this Merlin Bird ID app is a great way to potentially identify something. So thank you, everybody. This, if you can see, here's a white-throated sparrow that I'm releasing, and I'm now opening up for questions here.
Wow, thank you so much for your informative and wonderful talk, Andrea. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. So yes, as Andrea said, we're now opening up to questions. So feel free to use the Q&A function on your toolbar on Zoom, or you can ask your question in the chat box now. I do have a question from Rob here. Rob says, we trapped feral cats and took them into animal care and control. While they spayed them and clipped an ear, they did just release some back into the neighborhood. So they are still killing birds in our yard. Any suggestions?
Yeah, this is a tough one because we can't really enforce just getting rid of feral cats. One potential suggestion, if it's safe enough to do so, um, if you're able to catch any of those cats, even just putting a bell, a collar with a bell on it, so that
Mhm.
um, that cat is a little bit noisier. Those birds know that it's coming. Um, Also, if that's not an option, sort of contacting the city and encouraging some type of a response here is also an option. So we don't want these feral cats around. It's not, it's certainly trapping a lot of wildlife, but again, there isn't a whole lot we can do. One thing to suggest is, again, if it's safe to do, maybe add a bell to a collar there.
Mhm. Mhm. So another, well, this is actually more of a comment. Doug commented in the chat, I thought I was helping the nuthatches in my bird box by putting in some shredded paper. It was a lot of fun watching them go into the box, pick up the paper, and drop it outside. They didn't want my help.
Yeah,
So that's
there you
furthering
go.
your point, Andrea, from earlier.
Exactly. Doug, welcome back. But yes, that's their way of saying they don't want your help and they can fend for themselves.
Exactly. Okay, a question's come in from Carolyn. She asks, can you suggest an app you can use to identify birds by their song?
Um, I'm not personally aware of an app where you can record and put the song in there, but I do believe that the Merlin app will provide you with a song type. Julie, I don't know if you know of a specific app that works for song.
No, I'm wondering if somebody does. I've heard of such apps. I haven't used them
Yeah,
myself. An app I do recommend for learning birdsong is Larkwire. Larkwire is a really excellent app that you can use to quiz yourself if you're interested in learning more about birdsong and bird calls. I've used it a lot and it's really great because it gives you a lot of repetition, but makes it fun. And it's worked wonders for me learning my bird songs and calls for the past few years, and that's Larkwire. But I don't know many that work that way. I have heard actually, let's see if anyone in the chat knows. Oh, Steve's coming through. He says the Smart Bird ID app works with sound. Smart Bird ID. So you could check that one out for sure. Another great thing to do is on Facebook, for instance, there's the Ontario Birds group. And if you post, if you even with just with your cell phone, if you're able to take a video that includes the sound, you could always post it on a Facebook group like that. That was the Ontario
yeah,
Birds Facebook group, and you can ask them, "Hi, can anyone help me identify this bird?" And they're a really great group of people out there that love to help out with mystery bird IDs. I know I
yes,
do whenever I can.
that's a
Hopefully
great
that might be the same.
suggestion. Yeah.
Okay, Steve asks, what do you think of the solar pumps in a bird pond or bath?
So I'm not entirely sure what you mean what I think of them. Do you mean with respect to the fact that it's solar or the respect to the fact that it's a pump? Having a pump in a pond or a bath is definitely a good idea to keep that
Mhm.
water moving, making sure that it's not remaining stagnant. Um, I think the fact if it is actually solar, I think that's a bonus. But again, I hope you're just referring to the fact of using an actual pump. And if so, then it's definitely two thumbs up. Really, again, you don't want to introduce bacteria or diseases.
Mhm.
If you're moving that water around, that's always a good thing. Oh, are they
Mhm.
reliable? I'm not entirely sure. I don't have a pond, so I haven't personally used a solar pump. So I can't really speak to whether they're reliable. Um, yeah, I suppose you would have to have enough solar energy in order to maintain those. But again, sorry, I haven't personally used those.
Mhm. Interesting question. So Doug says he has tried Song Sleuth, another app, but have not hasn't got it working great yet. So maybe there's still a bit of technology that will come out in the next few years for identifying birdsong. Kathleen says, in the map you provided at the start of your presentation showing the number of migratory birds across the United States, I noticed an area around southern Illinois that showed no migratory bird activity. Is this an area with no data, or is there a reason why there are few migratory birds at this location? Wow, Kathleen, you must have eagle eyes
Yeah.
observing
So
that detail in the map.
I'm just re-pulling this up here. I don't know the official answer as to why there is no activity there. It does seem pretty strange that it's this circular hole, so it seems.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I'm actually not sure the reasoning for that. It could potentially be a blip in the actual map itself. It doesn't make sense why there would sort of be this circular hole as to why they're avoiding that area. I've certainly
Mhm.
never heard of yeah, that any reasoning for that being avoided. So I think it's very likely just some type of issue with their radar. That's a very
Mhm.
good observation.
Yes, Kathleen wins the Eagle Eyes Award
Yes.
this evening. Um, and Kathy says, my bird bath is popular, so I try to replace the water every other day or so. Is that frequent enough?
Yes, every other day. I think that's great. I mean, ideally it would be every day, but I think every other day, you're still not really introducing that ability for things like mosquitoes to be breeding or bacteria to
Mm.
really build up. So I think every other day, that's pretty good, Kathy.
Mhm. I think that's excellent. So Pat and David recommend Bird Jam as an app for iPod. Sounds like they have had success with that one. And Doug says it looks like a black hole to me in
Yes.
Southern Illinois. Well, we might have to see that on the news tomorrow, perhaps. um, Great. Well, does anybody have any last questions for Andrea? Just let us know in the Q&A or the chat. I will share, while I'm waiting just one more moment to see if anyone else has a question, I will just share, I said I would share the link for our other World Migratory Bird Days coming up. So I'll just share that in the chat right now. And it doesn't look like anybody has any other questions right now. So I want to thank you again, Andrea, for a wonderful talk this evening. And thank you to everybody for attending. Thank you to our London Bird Team partners. You can see here is the contact information for Andrea and myself if you want to keep in touch. Also, we have a website, birdfriendlylondon.ca, where you can find out all the news on making London a bird-friendly city. And so I encourage you to check out our website. And we also have our social media listed on here as well. So we do have a Facebook group. Please join us, as well as a Twitter. Here again are our London Bird Team partners. And I just wanted to end on the note that we actually have a poll going right now for London's official bird, the City of London's bird. So I'm going to share that link in the chat now. And so please take a moment to cast your vote for London's city bird. Members of our bird team have made arguments or at least explained why they have chosen different species. So you can have a look through our top picks for London City Bird and then cast your vote. What bird do you think it should be? Again, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thanks, Andrea, and happy birding. I hope you all see some wonderful birding activity, hopefully in your yard or in your neighborhood or here in London this spring. Thank you so much, everybody. Happy
Thanks,
birding.
everybody.